Now I only knew 3 things about the job. You had to be able to deadlift up to 100 pounds, they paid $20 an hour, and they were open to hiring felons. Obviously, I applied. Having a record basically meant my job prospects were no. I had to get shit jobs that paid almost nothing. I was living in my friend's basement, crashing on the couch and spending anything I earned on beer and weed. But I had dreams, you know? Sure, I fucked up as a kid, did my time, but now I wanted to be something. A girl from high school was claiming I was her baby's dad, and that was freaking me out. I needed the money. I didn't care what the job was. For $20 an hour, I'd do just about anything. I got a call from an automated line. In a dry, robotic voice, the recording said, "You have been selected for an interview. Come to 5201 Glendale Road at 11:15 p.m. Stay in your car until summoned. Follow instructions. Thank you for your interest." Now, on the one hand, that call was creepy as fuck. On the other hand, I got an interview. I didn't care how weird this job was, I was going to get it and finally be independent again. I told my friend where I'd be. I was a big guy, it's not like anything bad could happen to me. That night I drove to the address. I wanted to be there at the exact right time, but I was early. That showed responsibility, right? Like the call said, I stayed in my car. It was dark, but with my headlights I could see that the building was enormous. From where I sat, it looked like a giant brick square. I couldn't even tell if there were windows. No lights were visible. 2 thoughts crossed my mind. 1, this was a trick to try and rob me, let them try. Or 2, this was some sort of government operation. 11:15 came and went. I was getting nervous, I didn't like this at all. At 11:26 I was done. I revved my car and prepared to leave. From the darkness, a flashlight turned on. I squinted through the night and saw a vague outline of a person walking towards me. I turned the car off. The person then turned the flashlight to his face. He looked young, barely 18 if even that. He was wearing scrubs. The kid came right up to my window and motioned for me to get out. I opened my door. "Weird setup you got here," I said gruffly as I exited the car. "Perfect timing," he responded. "She said you'd arrive at 10:58 and turn to go at 11:26. It's incredible." "Well, who's this she?" I didn't appreciate the strange vibe I was getting. The kid smiled. He pulled the walkie-talkie from his pocket, and into it he said, "Apollo has landed." Suddenly, a floodlight illuminated the area. I blinked back in surprise. When the light was on, the building looked even more ominous. It had huge doors that led inside. The kid just kept that grin on his face. "You can follow me." "Oh, hold on a second." I reached for his arm, but he pulled away. "Don't touch it!" he screamed at me, completely confused. He regained his composure. "I apologize. In the future, please refrain from any physical contact with me or anyone else you'll meet today. If you have questions, they will be answered inside the facility." He turned and started walking towards the doors. Hesitantly, I followed. The door swung open and the interior was well lit. It was a sterile white. There were no people beside the kid and me. He took me through a series of hallways. All the while I contemplated whether $20 an hour was worth this craziness. Finally, we reached a large pair of red doors. The kid put his hand on a keypad and they opened. This hallway was darker than the others. At the end, the kid led me to a small room. It contained a table with 2 chairs sitting opposite each other. "Please take a seat, we'll be right with you." He closed the door without letting me reply. I walked a few times around the table, an uneasy feeling building in my chest. I tried to remind myself of my time in prison. I wasn't a pushover or some inexperienced loser. I could take whatever the hell this was. Finally, after a few minutes, I sat down. The instant I sat, a voice came over a loudspeaker. It was a woman's voice. "Good evening, Sydney." I looked around, trying to figure out where the speaker was. Never found it. Sydney, it's not polite not to respond. I rubbed my temples. It's Sid, I said. I prefer full names. Fine. What's your name? As soon as I'm sure you're the right person for the job, I'll introduce myself fully. Are you gonna try something? My voice sounded small compared to hers. Something? Like when you stabbed your father? My chest tightened. How the fuck do you know that? Oh, it's public record, Sydney. But don't worry, that won't hurt your chances at employment. Oh, quite the contrary. I need someone who isn't afraid to do the hard thing. My hands were in fists. What's the job anyway? I felt like an idiot talking to an invisible voice. There was a pause. Oh, it's a job where you cannot ask questions. You must do exactly what I ask of you. No questions, no hesitation. Oh, due to your history, I think you may be the person I'm looking for. But I have a test I need you to complete before I can hire you. Thought about asking another question, but figured it made no difference. Bring it on, I said between gritted teeth. The door suddenly opened. The kid entered. He carried a duffel bag and emptied it on the table. Then he sat in the other chair. He was still smiling. The contents of the bag were a variety of tools. A hammer, a wrench, a saw. There were a few nails and a rope. Finally, there was a mason jar without a lid. Before I could ask what the fuck I was supposed to do, the voice spoke again. This is Vinny. He was raised in a home where his father physically and sexually assaulted him. His mother resented the attention he got. She refused to feed him, so he ate out of the garbage. When he was 9, Vinny took his mother's iron and bashed his father's head in. Instead of being sent to a prison like you were, Sydney, he was sent to me. I stared at the kid, who didn't change his expression. His eyes were locked on mine. The voice continued. After killing his father, he drank a cup of his blood to satisfy his hunger. I think he's still hungry. The kid licked his lips. The one thing you need to do in order to get this job is to drain Vinny's blood, just enough to fill the jar. Then make him drink it. Once you have finished the task, you will have the job. Plus, a $2,000 signing bonus. I was at the same time horrified at the request and shocked at the bonus. The kid didn't seem to object to the terrible thing asked of me. I stood shakily. And if I don't? Well, then you walk out the door and go home. My brain was buzzing. I needed this job. Needed it so bad that cutting up this kid seemed almost reasonable. I mean, he clearly didn't mind it. Maybe he liked it in some sick way. I couldn't stop moving. I shuffled back and forth, trying to decide. I was brought back to the moment when I held the gun pointed at my dad. He had my mum in a headlock and was laughing at me. Called me a pussy. Said I'd never be a man. That's when I shot him 3 times. I picked up the saw and approached the kid. He wouldn't stop staring at me. I held the blade out, but then I realized I had no idea where to cut. The jar was big enough that I needed a good deal of blood. If I cut at the wrong place, he'd die. I didn't know where the important veins were. Almost as if the voice could see me, it said, "Do what you know, Sydney." I winced. She must have been talking about what I did to that guy in prison. Added 3 years to my sentence. I put the saw down and picked up the wrench. The guy had tried to shank me in my cell, so I taught him a lesson. "I'm sorry," I said out loud. The kid didn't flinch. I really didn't want to do this, but being in that room, it made me feel like I had no choice. I clamped the wrench around the kid's pointer finger and twisted as hard as I could. The bone snapped, the skin ripped. I grabbed the mason jar and held it beneath his hand. Blood dripped onto the glass. The kid didn't make a sound. I took his next finger and broke it in half. Got blood all over me. "Come on, get in the jar," I whispered. The kid seemed to be getting dizzy. I had to shatter 4 of his fingers to get enough blood in the jar. By the time he had passed out, I had to get him to drink it. Slapped him as hard as I could. The kid groggily opened his eyes, very confused. I tipped the jar to his lips. He choked the liquid down, coughing up half of it. "Keep drinking," I ordered him. He obeyed. His smile was gone, he looked scared. The last drop of blood fell onto his throat. I dropped his head, and it hung to the side. His eyes closed. I was breathing heavily. Blood was everywhere. I hadn't seen that much gore since I killed my dad. The door opened again. This time all the lights in the hall were on. A woman in a white coat stood in the doorway. She had curly hair up in a messy bun. She looked at me over her glasses. "Very good, Sydney. I'd like to offer you the job." Looked at her and then back at the kid. The color had drained from his face. My heart started beating faster. "Is the kid dead?" "Oh, probably," she responded nonchalantly. "But if it makes you feel any better, I made up the story about him being abused. He killed his father purely for fun." She walked over to the kid and felt his pulse. "Oh, no, he's still alive." She met my gaze. "Unlike your mother." I felt a tear in my eye. Pictures of that day flashed in my head. Shot 4 times. 3 hit my dad. 1 hit my mum. It was an accident. I pleaded in the courtroom as my family turned against me. I didn't want to kill her. Just him. Just the bastard. He was going to kill her. I wanted to help. I was only 18, but that was old enough. This woman knew exactly how to manipulate my emotions. "Oh, don't think about that now," the woman said. And suddenly, as if she pulled the memories from my brain, I was back in reality. "My name is Dr. Henrietta Rom. I will be your sole employer and supervisor. For now, you may go home. Do not speak of what happened to anyone. Your signing bonus has been placed in your car." My mouth hung open. She furrowed her brow. "It's time to leave now, Sydney. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Back in my car, I thumbed through the stack of hundreds. Trying not to think about the kid that I had disfigured. I had no idea in the coming years I would be doing things far, far worse. For the moment, I tried to focus on the positive. Hell, I got the job.